What an extraordinary couple of days that we've had. And I feel like this is kind of singing with the choir, the faithful believers. We've reviewed quite a bit of issues, best practices, what are the key critical issues, in a very open, transparent, and collaborative way, which is a refreshing thing to say when you're sitting in Washington, D.C. Well, we thought that what we would do, and it was by popular demand, is to talk about the experiences that we've had in Florida, our keys to success. And even when we talk about success, we know that we're still in the infancy. There's so much more to be done. But when we look at Florida as a microcosm, we see the future of, yes, the United States, and we see the future globally in that changing demographics, where many of the counties in Florida are majority minority. We see an aging population. We indeed see the future of Florida and the future of the United States. And we all know, particularly this audience, the importance of education. And we in Florida, under the leadership of Jeb Bush and other thought leaders, T. Willard Fair, who had the opportunity and the privilege of both leading and serving on Florida's Board of Education, understood that more needed to be done. So allow me to give that some context before our speakers, our experts, kind of do a drill down. And we're going to have a short video, presentation via PowerPoint, and then what we really want to do is engage in a dialogue. While we might articulate tools and programs and initiatives that we think worked favorably in Florida, we ask you to challenge that. We ask you to test that. And we ask you to help us improve on what we believe were some necessary first steps. So by way of background, in 1990, Florida had the reputation of too many kids that couldn't read, write, and were dropping out of high school. Our then Governor Bush came to the forefront with a plan to make and hold schools accountable, to raise expectations, to tool those teachers that indeed looked and needed those tools, to help those schools that wanted to improve, and to shine a light on accountability and empower parents. That morphed into the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test and took a newfound importance, particularly when we did something that seemed so basic but was so profound in fact, grading our schools. In a way not to punish, but to reward. In a way not to take away, but to make sure that we were providing the tools, the options, the choice that were needed when we put kids first. Over a decade later, the FCAT and school grades placed Florida in the forefront and center of education reform movement. Student scores on standardized tests have improved over the course of the decade, and Florida has been lauded for achieving and improving and decreasing the education gaps between minorities and majority students. The improvements have continued to come even in the face of rising student achievements. I look down again at my colleague T. Willard Fair, and he was all about we can do more, we can do better, to expect more, to provide the tools, and to deliver more. And under a formula that combined that thought, that commitment, and the rolling up the sleeves efforts, we believe that we've put in place some first steps that we would share with you today for us all to determine what might be the next steps. So I'm not going to talk much until we get into the Q&A. We've teed up, you know, some people have their Dr. Phil, well, we have our Dr. Christie. And she has a fan base in the audience. So she and Matthew are going to go through a PowerPoint presentation to which, if we have the opportunity to allow them to do the full presentation, that's wonderful. But if any of you are feeling the need to ask a question within, I'm going to sit here and entertain questions that you may want to interject in between that presentation. But before they start their formal presentation via PowerPoint if we could tee up our video.
There's one thing parents and business leaders alike look for when choosing a new community: a really good local school. But how do you know if the school is good? Is a 1-rated school good or a 5? How good is satisfactory? What does making progress mean? In 1999, Florida made the revolutionary decision to grade schools on an A through F scale, just like students. 10 other states have since adopted this tool. The result? Everyone gets it, without a word of explanation, and they take action. No one wants a D or F school. Everyone wants an A. Behind the simplicity is a well-thought-out system of accountability. The school grading formula includes overall performance and graduation rates, as well as progress, with extra focus placed on those students struggling the most. Because these grades are based on objective measurements of students' academic success, it shines a bright light on effectiveness, and that, in itself, creates a catalyst for change. We know a data-driven, transparent accountability system is the foundation of a good education system. The A through F school grade system provides parents, school, community, and state leaders the information they need to make sure no student is left behind.
I want to first note that it's kind of awkward for me to be here because I'm with people like Christy and Dr. Fair, Mr. Fair, everyone. I want to just start by saying I had absolutely nothing to do with this. Okay? I don't live in Florida. I visit there on occasion now, but you know. So I'm a guy who's from Texas who lives in Arizona. Through kind of a weird set of circumstances, I became involved with this group because I was basically involved in a debate between people who wanted to do standards-based reform and who didn't like the idea of doing parental choice reform, and those of us, like myself, who support parental choice reform, but I also support standards-based reform, right? And so I got involved in this debate, and you know, there's all this, you know, kind of back and forth and whatnot. And I thought to myself, my basic argument was, these things are not competitive with each other. Actually, they're mutually reinforcing, right? Transparency and choice go together like, you know, peanut butter and chocolate in a Reese's peanut butter cup, right? But I thought, you know, I made that argument. I said you could do both of these things, but I thought, you know, if that's true, then I need to be able to prove that. So in my office in Phoenix, Arizona, I start digging into NAEP data, and I discover, not that, something that looks like this. It turns out that sitting in my office in Phoenix, Arizona, I discovered that Florida's 4th grade Hispanic students were outscoring the statewide average for all students in my home state of Arizona in a test of reading, a national test, the most highly respected one. And they weren't outscoring us by a little bit. These were only the Hispanic students in Florida compared to all of the students in Arizona in a test of reading that is given in, you guessed it, English, okay? They weren't just outscoring our statewide average, they were outscoring our statewide average by about a grade and a half, okay? So I was working for a think tank in Phoenix, and I started, you know, writing this. Now you can imagine, you know, if you've been following the difficulties in my state of Arizona, the reaction I got, right? I literally had hundreds of emails pour into me saying, Ladner, you're an idiot, which is true, right? Ladner, you're an idiot. You don't understand. Florida's Hispanics, those are Cubans, and Cubans are wealthy Republicans, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I mean, like, my grandfather actually had owned a house in the Florida Keys, and I'd spent some time down there, enough to know that, yes, Cubans, you know, vote Republican, but, you know, they're not all wealthy, right? They're, of course, fabulously wealthy, Cubans and whatnot. So, you know, I started looking into the data further. Turns out in the 2000 census, only 30% of Hispanics in Florida were actually Cubans. You know, I report this, that's not good enough. So then I go in the data further and find out that free and reduced lunch eligible Hispanic students in Florida score higher by a wide margin than the statewide average for all students in Arizona in a test given in English. They're still not convinced. So then I go in and say, okay, well now I'm gonna get really cruel. I'm gonna go look at the numbers for free lunch eligible Hispanic students in Florida. Okay, these people are, family of four, average income, maximum income, I should say, about $28,000. Okay, now, some of you may remember Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Daniel Patrick Moynihan had a joke about this NAEP data, right? And he said that performance on the NAEP is perfectly correlated with proximity to the Canadian border. Right? So that the state wanted to increase their NAEP scores, what they should simply do is pick up and move closer to Canada. Right? He was making a joke about the racial achievement gap. I submit to you that if Daniel Patrick Moynihan were alive today, he'd be quite happy to see this map with Oregon on it, with Michigan on it, with Illinois, with South Dakota on it. Florida's Hispanic students are outscoring them in a test of fourth grade reading. Here's another good chart. This is about mathematics achievement, and don't try to read it because it's really nerdy and really complicated, but basically what this is showing is mathematics progress on the NAEP. That's, the up and down, and then the across is the increase in real spending per pupil between 1990 and, back there. Okay, bottom line, there are 3 states there that improved a lot. You'll see Florida is one of them, and then there's Delaware, Maryland, okay? Now, look at how much they increased their spending, just those 3 states, okay? If you're a state lawmaker in a state like Maryland that, you have, Maryland's done a great job, don't get me wrong, they made a lot of progress, and I know some of you are trying to find your state on there, not all of them are on there, but in any case, if you have the money to increase your per pupil spending by $6,000 per pupil, and you're not really wanting to fight it out over these things, then Maryland, you should study the Maryland model carefully. However, if you're in a state that has severe financial constraints and how much you can increase per pupil spending, you don't have billions of dollars burning a hole in your pocket, you have a diverse student population, and you don't spend above the national average per pupil, then you might also want to look very carefully at what Florida did, okay? Florida has a very low increase in per pupil spending during this period and a very large increase in academic attainment, okay? And that's ultimately what most states need, okay? Most states need to get more bang for their buck in the system, okay? So, how did they do this? I'm just gonna briefly kind of talk about what I see as the general formula. There's no one thing that Florida did to achieve these results. It didn't happen, right? They didn't, go to open classrooms. They didn't adopt school uniforms for everyone. There's no magic bullet, okay? But generally speaking, the Florida formula was anchored by school grading, which is going to kick off to Christy here in a minute. That provided the basic transparency and is really the key reform in a lot of ways to a lot else that happened. There are a number of these types of reforms to provide transparency, to create incentives for performance, okay? And also, from the bottom up, there's a lot of parental choice, okay? So it's a top-down, bottom-up strategy from the beginning, right? And the ultimate goal of this is to improve the quality of learning in the public school system itself, okay? There's always going to be limits to how much we can spend more of. The biggest opportunity to improve American public education is to get better results for the massive spending that we already have in it. Okay, so with all that, that's just a sort of prologue. Turn it over to Christy.
Good afternoon, or morning still. Thanks so much for coming to our session. We're absolutely thrilled to have you here. This is one of my favorite things to talk about is A through F school grading. I had the honor and privilege of working in the state of Florida during Governor Bush's 2 terms in office, and had the great privilege of running the school grading office and overseeing the school grading office while I was there. So this is one of my favorite things to talk about. If you have questions, please stop me as we go through the presentation. I like answering questions too. One of the big mantras that Matt was talking about is measuring and data and information. And we believe in Florida that anything that gets measured actually gets done. And we have to provide a very transparent way of providing this data and information to educators, the public, the teachers, and students to really understand what's happening in our Florida public schools. When we talk about school grading A through F, the actual implementation of this policy doesn't cost states anything. States already have all of the data and information they need to grade schools right now, between their reading and math tests and the calculations and information that they currently have to compute either AYP or whatever their federal accountability measure is. This particular policy is just a different way of using the data in a more transparent fashion and managing growth and expectations in one composite grade. So like most states, Florida tests in both reading and math, 3 through 8 and high school. It tests in science and writing still. We have been implementing the Florida Comprehensive Assessment Test, which is our statewide federal accountability assessment, since the mid-1990s. So this test predates NCLB, and we've continued to implement it and raise the standard and raise the bar on it. We have 5 achievement levels on our assessment, and our middle achievement level 3, is considered proficient. Florida's not, or the administration when we worked there is not the first administration to actually grade schools. Florida's been grading schools since FCAT has been around. Under a couple Democratic administrations, they started grading schools using categorical descriptors. They used descriptors such as high performing, low performing, critically low performing. And there was a lot of confusion about what's the difference between a performing school and a low performing school versus a critically low performing school. Was it bad and really, really bad, or is it just kind of sort of bad? Just not a lot of information about what those categorical descriptors really meant. And so they came up with a better idea back in 1998 and said, well, we'll just grade them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. At least there's a better description. It's more categorical, it's numeric, 5's bigger than 1, but no one really knew what was better, a 5 or a 1. Is this golf or baseball? So that really didn't catch on either. It wasn't until 1999 when we really adopted the A through F school letter grading that this really took traction and really got the attention of the public and educators. Grading schools A through F was a really, really big deal in the state of Florida. And it got a lot of media attention, and it got a lot of people riled up, and it made a true difference in reform and education. While there's no silver bullet and there's no policy reform that's going to improve student achievement solely, being able to report transparent data is the #1 or foundational thing that needs to happen before you can start implementing policies and other programs that will make a difference. So in Florida, our school grading formula for elementary and middle schools and high schools in the early years has been based on 2 major components. What % of students in the school are proficient is half the grade, and then what % of students in the school are making at least a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time is the other half of the grade. In 2010, the legislature decided to implement some more provisions for high school, so we hold high schools more accountable for college and career readiness measures, including graduation rates of students at risk, college and career readiness, and acceleration rates. And so there are some additional things that high schools are now measured on. This past year, Florida also included some additional measures for middle school. We wanted to include some of those college and career readiness components down in the middle grades. So it's looking at the % of kids that are taking high school or advanced coursework. And then when we go to end of course tests, we have an end of course civics test that will be administered in middle school that will also be included in the grade. But for the most part right now, grades are based on the % of students that are proficient and the % of students that make a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time. Florida defines progress or making a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time in 3 very distinct ways. We consider a student making a year's worth of progress if they move up an achievement level on our statewide assessment test. So if they move from an achievement level 1, our lowest level, to achievement level 2, they're considered to have made a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time. We also consider a student to have made progress if they maintain a proficient level on the next higher grade level test. So if a student was achieving at an achievement level 4, which is just above proficient in 3rd grade, and an achievement level 4 in 4th grade, they're achieving at the same level on the next higher grade level test. So more rigorous content, but achieving at the same proficiency level. So we consider them to have made a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time. We do not give credit for progress if a student achieved at an achievement level 4 in 1 year and then dropped to an achievement level 3. Even though the student was still proficient, we do not count that as a student making growth because they regressed an achievement level. Florida also has a vertical scale, so there's curricular alignment between our tests as well as a scale alignment on our assessments. So if a student is in the lowest 2 achievement levels, whereby they have not yet achieved proficiency, we have a developmental score that says if they improved a specific number of developmental scale score points, they're considered to have made a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time. These were constructed by our psychometricians and curriculum experts to determine what does a year's worth of progress look like on this particular scale. If you're saying, what does that mean? Our state doesn't have a vertical scale. You can still do this even if you have a regular scale that's not vertically aligned, as long as you have curricular alignment from grade to grade, meaning your 4th grade test is built off of your 3rd grade standards and expectations for 4th graders, and your 5th grade test builds off of knowledge students should have gained in 4th and 3rd grade. So it's possible to be done even if you don't have a vertical scale. I know that's a big concern when I talk to states. So very simply, school grading in Florida is based on 8 different components. We look at what % of students are proficient in reading, math, science, and writing, and what % of students have made at least a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time in reading and math. And then we also have a special emphasis or focus on the lowest 25% of students in our schools. Florida does not look at school subgroups. We do not look at economically disadvantaged, racial ethnic groups or gender groups. We look specifically at the lowest 25% of students. The reason Florida does this is because we want to focus on students that can't read and can't do math, rather than students that are of a specific demographic subgroup. And so for each individual school, we look at the bottom 25%, and every single school in the state of Florida has a bottom 25%. Not every single school has all of the racial subgroups and economic disadvantage subgroups or English language learner or student with disability subgroups, but every school does have a lowest 25%. So we really place a focus on those lowest performing students to improve what they're doing. So the students that are in the lowest 25%, we look at whether or not they're making a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time, not just in the lowest 25% category, but also in the all students category, and they're also included in the proficiency calculations as well. So those students who are our lowest performing students are counted multiple times in our school grading system. So as an example, this is Sunshine Elementary School. Schools can earn 800 points on our school grading scale. The points are just simply an aggregation of the percentages that you see here. So for example, there are 63% of students that are proficient in reading in this school. This school earns 63 points towards their school letter grade for that component. You can see here that 66% of all students made a learning gain in reading. The school earns 66 points for that particular component. Each of those percentages are just translated into school grade points and aggregated. So overall, this school earned 508 points, or a B, for their school letter grade. You might ask why we don't have learning gains for writing or science. It's because writing or science are tested 3 years apart in grades 4, 8, and 10, and 5, 8 in high school, and so we chose not to incorporate a learning gains measure for writing and science as well. So one of the other provisions that we have for school grades is at least 95% of students have to be tested. And you say, well, that's pretty common. No Child Left Behind requires that. Most of our schools do that. Remember when we implemented school grades, it was pre-NCLB. We learned the hard way that not all schools tested all of their students. There were some schools that were strategic in asking some students to stay home on test day so they wouldn't be included in their school grade. Florida has a lot of lessons learned like this with implementing accountability systems that we're more than willing to share. and provide with you. But one of the strategic things is making sure that all of your students are actually included in your accountability system rather than a selective exclusion of them. And I have been talking a lot about the lowest 25%. In addition to those students being counted multiple times in the school grade for each of those components, we also say that in order for a school to earn an A in the state of Florida, that at least 50% of their lowest 25% of students have to make a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time. If at least 50% of students do not make a learning gain, that school cannot earn an A, even if they've earned enough school grade points, and they will be dropped to a B letter grade. In order for a student to earn a B or a C, or a school to earn a B or a C, at least 50% of the students in the lowest 25% have to make a learning gain either in the current year or the prior year, otherwise they too are dropped an entire letter grade, even if they have enough points. So the focus truly in Florida is moving up those lowest performing students in order to demonstrate that they're making learning gains year after year.
Any questions? Thought I saw a hand go up.
One other thing, and we'll talk about this a little later in the presentation too, is that Florida now has a provision that says if 75% of the schools in the state are graded an A or a B, we automatically increase the number of points that are required to earn an A or a B for the following year. So this is the whole mantra of success is never final, reform is never finished. We continuously raise the bar on our standards for students and schools and educators in Florida. I mentioned this already, that we're adding a couple components to our middle school grading, just consistent with the way our assessment program is being implemented. High schools, we have several components. There was a lot of concern in the state that 11th and 12th graders, because our testing program ended in 10th grade, weren't included in the school grading system. So several measures were included for graduation rate, at-risk graduation rate, participation and performance in post-secondary or college readiness and career readiness options. So students taking advanced placement classes, IB courses and exams, industry certification exams, dual enrollment, if they are taking and passing those particular exams and classes, will earn credit in the school's grade. And then we also have a provision in there for college readiness. So what percent of students are testing college ready on ACT and SAT for the school grade. This is by far my favorite slide and the most illustrative of what is happening with school grades and performance in the state of Florida. You can see that back in 1999, we had nearly twice as many D and F schools as we did A and B schools. I'm sure the others on the stage and in the audience can attest how tough that press conference was back in 1999. You are not very popular when you come out and say you have more D and F schools than you do A or B schools in the state of Florida. But it was a very, very important statement for Florida to make when you looked at our NAEP scores. Our NAEP scores were showing us down in the 45th rankings in reading and math. For us to come out and say that our schools were A and B schools would be misleading the public. So in 1999, we did have more D and F schools than we did A or B schools. The thing I like highlighting is that in 2000, we did not change our test. We did not change our standards. We did not change what it meant to be proficient. We did not change the number of points it required to earn an A, B, C, D, or F in the state of Florida, and we had more schools that were A and B than were D and F in just 1 year, when expectations were clear, data was transparent, and standards were high. We had a huge turnaround in what D and F versus A and B schools look like. Nothing changed between 99 and 2000 except for practice in the classroom. That's it. And again, in 2001, you see even more A and B schools, over 1,000 A and B schools in 2001 compared to only 307 D and F schools. So in just 2 years, Florida literally tripled, more than tripled the number of A and B schools without changing standards, without changing expectations, and holding a hard line in policy. I mean, we set high standards, and students, educators, principals all rose and met those standards. And as we had talked about, I should tell you what those black dotted lines mean, since they're on the slide. Those black dotted lines are instances where Florida raised the bar. We had a remarkably courageous governor and an equally courageous State Board of Education that was wholly supportive of raising standards when school grading was perceived to be too easy. So over the course of 10 years, we raised the standards 5 times on school grades, and every time we raised the standards, sure, we might have had a dip in the number of A and B schools or leveling off of A and B schools, but right after the year following an increase of standards, we had them bounce right back up, because when they knew what the standards and expectations were, they rose to meet those standards. The thing we talk about is this isn't a silver bullet to changing student achievement. It's not a silver bullet like we've been talking about. There isn't one, but it did change the culture of education in the state of Florida. It changed the culture of our districts from being kind of a complacent entity that had schools in it to an entity striving for excellence. I mean, they had school board meetings after school grades came out that said, we're going to be the first district in the state that doesn't have any F schools. And then it was, we're going to be the first district in the state that doesn't have any D schools. And then these past couple of years, it's going to be, we're going to be the first district in the state with all A schools. So it really changed the conversation that boards were having about schools in their district. Media attention. You know, school grades are huge media feed in the state of Florida. In addition to publishing bus schedules and lunch menus and everything in back to school editions of papers, school grades are the thing that's the top published thing in the newspaper. And the day after school grades are released by the department, it's what you read about on the headline, front page, above the fold, all the time. The Department of Education, when they release school grades, in the first 24 hours that their school grading website is up, over 1 million people visit the site to see what their school grades were. And schools, districts, parents, school districts and teachers have known what their grade is. So it's not just school principals going out to see what their grade is. They've known that for 30 days. I mean, they have a review period for it. This is just all public, just curious as what's happening. If you pick up an MLS listing for any house that's for sale, one of the top things on the paper is what is the house zoned for? What school is it in? What's the grade of the school? And just a lot of community support and community pride and engagement. Dr. Fair can probably tell you a lot more about those two components, but one of the things that I always like to do is working for the department. The timeliness of the data was very important. We also have requirements for third grade progression and high school graduation. We always made sure that those test scores came back to students first, so they had more time to prepare, more time to plan, and make sure that they met expectations. And then if you are interested in implementing school grades, the Florida legislature did a great thing for us, is they funded a school recognition program. Essentially, this program says that if a school earns an A or improves at least one letter grade, the school will get $100 per student. It goes directly to the school, it bypasses the district and the administrative set-aside, and it bypasses collective bargaining. The intent of the legislature was that this is a performance pay program, that you are to use this funding to reward staff and educators in the school. 85% of this funding to date has gone directly to teachers and educators within the schools that have earned it, making it essentially the largest performance pay program in the country. Funds could also be used for non-recurring expenditures, so buying a new playground for kids or computer equipment, but a majority of it went to funding teacher bonuses. So, Dr. Ladner can do his story time. I'm
no,
talking
no,
about
you're
this
right.
one too.
No, you're not, actually.
Okay.
I am. We're having a little technical difficulties up here. Just a quick story about A3 upgrading. We adopted this in Arizona, and when I go to the airport, I used to go right by this elementary school every year, every day, every week, or whatever it is I travel. Had this giant banner, is the size of that back wall, practically, you know, and it said, "Such and such elementary, we are a performing school," right? What they conveniently forgot to tell anyone, or no one noticed, or whatever, right, was that performing was the second lowest ranking you can possibly get. There were all of 16 schools in the state of Arizona that got something lower than performing. Thus, performing school equals, let's call it D, right? Now, when I drove to the airport to come here, that banner's gone, right? And there's actually some lawmakers in Arizona that want to pass a law to require you to put the letter grade out front. So, another big thing that was done was to really go after a very, very rigorous and serious literacy program in the early grades. And if there's like 3 charts in this presentation I want you to just burn in your memory, this is the first one, okay? This is a study done by the Annie Casey Foundation that a very long-term cohort study of students. And when they looked at 19-year-old dropouts, as they've been following these kids all the way, you know, since kindergarten, right? You can go and look at the kids who are 19 years old and have dropped out of school, and go back and, wow, what was going on with them in their early grades, okay? Turns out only 11% of kids who can read on, you know, that were at the appropriate level of reading for a 3rd grader, only 11% of the dropouts are those. All the rest of them are kids that have already, you know, are struggling with reading early, okay? Basically what happens to kids, okay, is that you have a literacy window, right? Your brain is wired to learn how to read at a young age, okay? It's very similar to the neurology of learning a foreign language, right? Christy and I could try to study Danish now, right? But it's not going to work out for us very well, at least not me. Maybe Christy could do it, right? I will never be a fluent Danish speaker because I would be trying to learn it as a 45-year-old, right? In the same way, right, it's not impossible to become a good reader past that window of opportunity, but it becomes extraordinarily difficult, okay? Kids who don't learn how to read, usually by the end of the 3rd grade, right, are sent on into the rest of the system, right? You don't have the basic skills required to be a 4th grader, but that's okay. You'll catch up, we hope, right? You're an illiterate 3rd grader who's made into an illiterate 4th grader, an illiterate 5th grader, a 6th grader, 7th grader, right? You're a 7th grader sitting in a science classroom with a science book you can't read. One way to, actually, I think the most accurate way to think about this is that grade level material keeps going up and you can't go with it, okay? These kids will describe themselves as bored, they become frustrated, and they actually know that they've been kind of given the short end of the stick. They don't know why. They often become disruptive, discipline problems. They never see themselves going to college. They start to wonder, what am I doing here, right? They're getting passing grades, but they understand that this is a farce, right? They may not be able to read very well, but that doesn't mean they can't figure that out. It's blindingly obvious, okay? And these kids start dropping out of school in large numbers starting in the 8th grade. And your dropout pipeline is built back in K-3, okay? This is happening in every state in this country, and it is a disgrace. And one of the key Florida reforms was to do something about it, okay? These are other indicators about how important it is to get your reading early. The Florida early literacy strategy was multifaceted. There is one element that gets more attention than anything else, but let me emphasize now that there was a whole lot of things done, okay? The thing that gets the most attention is a retention policy, okay? The bottom line is that there's screening, there's, you know, retraining of teachers, there's family literacy plans drawn up for kids, there's early testing, there's all this stuff, okay? But the bottom line is, in Florida, is that after multiple attempts with different tests and all these other sort of things. The bottom line is that you have to show us some progress towards becoming a literate reader. You don't even have to be proficient, but there has to be some level of achievement there. And if not, the default becomes that you will be retained back in third grade, okay? And that doesn't mean that they're going to throw you back into the same classroom that it didn't work out for you the first time. There's extra help. There's all these sorts of things, okay? And there are good cause exemptions on all these sort of things. But the default for a child that has not mastered these critical skills at the developmentally appropriate age, right, is that they will be retained in third grade. This is a very, very difficult and controversial policy at the time. So the way they measured this was that these are basically the same achievement levels that Christy showed you earlier. At Florida FCAT has 5 achievement levels. And basically, what you needed to do, some way or another, whatever's test, is you needed to show FCAT 2, okay? That's it. You've got to show us FCAT 2. These are the good cause exemptions. Talk about those if you're interested later. Here's what happened, okay? I think this story is fascinating. If you look at, say, the first one, 2000, in the red chart, the red line there, 29% of the kids in Florida were scoring FCAT 1 in third grade reading. And let me translate that into a more visceral term. 29% of the students in Florida were utterly and completely illiterate. Were unable to read at all, okay? You see the first year of the policy, 2002, 2003, okay? 13.2% of the students are retained. Ouch. I believe that was an election, in Governor Bush's re-election year, right? So that takes some real courage to do something like that, okay? Main thing I want you to notice is the trend in both the red lines and the blue lines, okay? The percentage of kids being retained has been approximately cut in half, okay? And it's being cut in half because the percentage of kids ever scoring FCAT 1 in the first place is going down, right? Fewer kids being retained. Why? Because more kids are learning how to read in the first place, which is exactly how you want to stop retention, right? The goal is not retention. The goal is to get kids to learn how to read. And with that, I'll hand it back to Christy.
That I wanted to make on that previous slide is you notice that we had in the first year when the policy was conceived, 29% of our students at achievement level 1, 5 achievement levels. Even if they were proportionately distributed, it's way over representation in achievement level 1. That's ridiculous. I mean, there wasn't an outcry about it yet in Florida. When the policy went into place, you can see that even before it was implemented, we had a 6% decrease in the percent of students in level 1. Just the threat of being retained caused a change of practice in the schools. So huge impact before it even went into effect. And as Dr. Ladner had said, as it went into effect, we saw that continuous decrease in the percent of achievement level 1 students too. So lots of strategies were in place to reduce that, but namely focusing more on K2, even though there wasn't assessments at those grades for the state level, teachers were being more serious about K2 reading. So funding for success. This is one of my favorite stories on this one. Florida used to have a supplemental academic instruction fund that was given to districts based on whether or not they had to provide summer school and dropout prevention activities. It was a $700 million fund pot that says you'll get money for every dropout and student you need to provide summer school to. Well, that's funding failure. It's kind of a perverse incentive saying, in order to get any of the state money, you have to not do your job throughout the year, and we'll give it to you at the end of the year for all the kids that were unsuccessful. So the Florida legislature really re-engineered how this funding was distributed and allocated it on an FTE basis regardless of performance of students. So school districts in Florida are now allocated this money and said, you first, if you have any schools that are, or any students that are, or schools that are D and F schools, you have to fund and use your resources from the Supplemental Academic Instruction Fund to help these particular schools first. If you didn't have any D and F schools, you could skip to the next one. And it said, If you have struggling third graders who aren't going to be promoted to fourth grade, you then have to use the money to fund those students to make sure that they're reading properly. And then it said if you don't have a lot of struggling readers and you still have money left over, then you use it to help your dropouts or students that can't pass your 10th grade graduation test. And if you just had a few of those and you had money left over, you could spend it on anything you wanted. So there was much more incentive now to get this state funding to make sure you didn't have any DNF schools, to make sure you didn't have your struggling readers, and to make sure you didn't have any students at risk of dropping out or not passing that high school graduation exam, because then the district had the flexibility to use this pot of money for anything. So they just changed the function of the funding to go from a perverse incentive for funding failure to, if you have a lot of success in your district, you have more flexibility in spending this particular funding. So just a different way of looking at things. There's so many things that we do in education are funded based on things that we don't really want to incentivize, but yet we haven't figured out how to turn that or change that around. Okay, also ensure that funding levels are equitable, ensuring that schools that receive at least 85% of the funds that they're generating from the funding formula. So in other words, sometimes schools would receive only, it's like federal tax. You pay up to the federal government. Some of it comes back to the state, but sometimes it's not dollar for dollar. The same thing would happen in Florida schools. And so you would send money up to the state, it would be reallocated or redistributed. They have a provision now that says at least 85% of the funding that the school generates is guaranteed to go back to the school. Sometimes it's more, but it's never ever going to be less. And they also wanted to incentivize principals for spending money efficiently. So we all probably have at some point or another worked in state government where you're really trying to hurry up and spend money by the end of the fiscal year so you don't lose it. There are some provisions put into Florida law now that allows principals to spend more money more efficiently and allowing them to carry it over and use unspent funds following years.
Dr. Kravanek, if we go back to your grading formula, where there's a special focus on the bottom 25%, and the grading is such that you look at the years base of years worth of learning and what they need to achieve in order to get an A or B. How does that factor into funding? Because I could imagine that schools would say, oh, these kids are harder to teach, we need more resources. Does the funding formula kind of play into allowing the tailoring of funds or better teachers to focus in on those students?
Sure. In Florida, we don't base funding on school grading. It's based on an FTE allocation. But schools that earn higher letter grades, A and B letter grades, do have more flexibility, and districts that earn A and B letter grades have more flexibility in funding. Schools that earn DNF do receive more funding, primarily because they may be receiving more federal funds or more supplemental funds in order to provide additional resources for DNF schools. The figure that's out there is it's about $1,000 more per student in a D or an F school than it is for an A or a B school of resources that actually go there. And those D and F schools do have some provisions where they have to write a school improvement plan where those funds are more targeted to specific interventions, to specific policies and programs that will help those students.
So there's a way to get to that issue, even under an FTE allocation. There's a way to tailor it down to ensure that there's adequate resources to get to those key problem areas.
Yes, the catchy phrase is, with accountability comes flexibility.
Perfect, thank you, great answer. Okay.
So Florida likes to incentivize rigor and make sure that we have college and career ready students. And so back in 2000, we developed, well, even before 2000, but back in 2000, we really developed a strong partnership with the College Board. We wanted to be sure that our students in Florida were prepared and ready to go to college. And to do that, we wanted to provide them some opportunities to participate in rigorous post-secondary type work. In Florida, we started offering the PSAT, the PSAT, free to all 10th grade students in the state of Florida. It's the qualifier for the National Merit Exam, as well as a tool that provides somewhat of a diagnostic measure as to whether or not students are ready for post-secondary work, and if they're not, what types of courses and skills they need to work on to be successful in post-secondary. We provided incentives for districts to train teachers to be advanced placement teachers, so more courses would be offered to students in high school. So we provided funding for all of the professional development. And then we also instituted a bonus program for teachers. Any school that had a student passing an AP exam would earn $700 for the school. Any teacher that had a student passing an AP exam would earn $50 per student, up to $2,000. And if the teacher was in a D or an F school, they would earn $500 for each student passing an AP exam. You might say, Christy, this sounds like a lot of money to be spending on advanced placement courses, but if you know that if a student earns a 3 or above on an advanced placement course, it counts for college credit. So not only are students getting exposure and getting rigorous advanced placement coursework while they're still in high school, they will learn and understand whether or not they're prepared to go to college or a post-secondary opportunity. And if they are, then they're going to be earning college credit, which means the state doesn't have to pay for them to take a particular college credit. So it might look like this costs a decent amount of money to pay bonuses to schools and bonuses to teachers and to pay for professional development, but it's actually a pretty decent cost-saving measure in the state of Florida because Florida subsidizes college credits quite substantially with state funding. The tuition portion that the student's paying does not cover the cost of a college credit. And so when we implemented back in 2000 the Advanced Placement and College Board Partnership, you can see that we had about 35,000, 36,000 students taking advanced placement exams. Just a decade later, we had over 163,000 students taking advanced placement exams, or a 370% increase in students taking advanced placement exams, which is pretty big deal, considering this is considered college level coursework that our high school students are participating in. Not only did we see an increase in participation in the courses, so students were getting exposure and realizing whether or not they were prepared to take college level rigor classes in high school, but we also had a huge increase in passage rates. We had 125,000 students passing advanced placement exams. That's 125,000 college courses these students didn't have to take, and it got them a jump up on college, so they're not paying for their credit or tuition either. And also gave them the courage and kind of the self-esteem that they could be successful in college. So some students that might not have been thinking about going are actually going. We saw the biggest increase in passing scores with our Hispanic students. We had over a 400% increase in passage rates for Hispanic, or percent of students passing AP exams for Hispanic students. And for our African American students, a 440% increase in students passing AP exams, simply because the opportunity was available. The teachers were trained to provide students with this rigorous coursework, and they passed. I mean, you set high expectations, and again, in the case of the College Board Partnership, they met the expectations. Quality educators, this is more of a story. In Florida, prior to 2002, Florida only allowed teachers who were going through colleges of education or professionals who went back to a college of education to earn 20 additional college credits to teach in Florida public schools. The only way you could be certified is if you had a degree from a college of education, or if you didn't have a degree from the college, you just had a regular bachelor's degree, you had to go back and take 20 course credits at a university. And so Florida said this doesn't create a competitive workforce in the state. It doesn't incentivize people who are career changers to go into education. It doesn't incentivize people who in retirement want to go back and teach a course or two in high school because they're really good at their job and want to share their expertise. So in 2002, Florida started holding public hearings about how do we change, or in late 2000, 2001, started holding public hearings about how we could change certification requirements. And Florida ended up opening reciprocity to any state. So if you are a certified teacher in one state that's not Florida, you go to Florida and you want to be certified, just simply have to pass the content area exam and you can be certified in Florida. You do not have to go back to school, take additional hours, or anything like that. We also accept the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards and the American Board certifications for teachers. If you have one of those, you just have automatic reciprocity in the state of Florida. We also have educator preparation institutes. Florida was facing a pretty critical teacher shortage, and so we opened up our 2-year colleges to offer 4-year degree programs to prepare teachers for the classrooms. We also have, every single district in the state of Florida has an alternative certification program where teachers or people that want to be teachers come to the district. They open up certification, they go through training at the district level, and the district can alternatively certify them. If you taught in post-secondary education for 2+ years, you can earn a teaching certificate in Florida. TFA is recognized, as well as adjunct certificates for part-time teachers. The exciting or ironic thing about this is when we are holding the public hearings and how important this is and how many qualified people are out there that states just really close their doors to providing is. We were doing a public hearing over in Daytona, and it's on the east coast of Florida, kind of partway down, and we were sitting in the room and we were holding public hearings about whether or not we should open certification or not, and here's kind of what we were proposing. We had a whole group of people saying that's not a good idea, it's not something you should do, and an older gentleman in the back stood up and he's like, I'm a rocket scientist. I would like to teach in your Florida high schools. He was a retired NASA physicist who wanted to teach a couple courses at the local high school and couldn't because he wasn't certified. And so that was just kind of your eye-opening experience of, if we're not letting rocket scientists teach in the state of Florida, I mean, we have a problem. So that was just an eye-opening experience to us staffers at the department to really turn around and change it. Currently in the great state of Florida, over half the teachers that are hired every year do not come from a traditional 4-year college of education. And I say this, and you saw the data. Well, we didn't show any data. We have data.
Not yet.
Student performance did not suffer.
Working out well.
Student performance did not suffer because we opened up the teaching field to people who did not come through a 4-year college of education. Our test scores are still improving, NAEP scores are still improving, so this was not a detriment to our public school children.
What were the reasons that they gave why this would be a bad idea, so that we would be learning?
The question was why did people think this would be a bad idea, that the teachers wouldn't be prepared?
There's actually great studies that have been done that shows, very sophisticated statistical studies that show there is no relationship between teacher certification and student learning gains. There are good teachers, there are bad teachers, there's bad alternatively certified teachers, there's good traditionally certified teachers, but statistically there's no difference. People, however, assume, right, that certification is an indicator of quality. The problem is that it's not.
And the somewhat, not the somewhat political answer to this is colleges of education were concerned that their pipeline of students would be diminished if we opened up certification to people who were not from the College of Education, and traditionally colleges of education typically generate a lot of cash flow for universities, so I think there was some concern on the university's behalf that we're opening it up. I think on the teacher side of it, they were concerned about more competition for jobs that they've held, and so they weren't as excited about allowing more people into their field.
Okay. And if you could state your name and your question, that would be quite helpful, sir.
Thank you. I'm Terry Whitney from the College Board. Colorado last year passed a 3rd grade literacy bill. However, some of us feel that it's somewhat weak because it does not actually have the mandatory retainment provision. You included in one of your slides that you have an early literacy screening provision. Could you talk a little bit about how that works for kindergarten through 2nd grade?
Sure. Florida has a number of things. In the past, Florida has always provided screenings and diagnostics, the IRTA, the DAR, Fox in a Box, a bunch of different tools for free to the districts to monitor progress for students in the schools. Florida recently developed the FAIR, the Florida Assessment for Instruction in Reading. That is a K-12 progress monitoring diagnostic tool for teachers to use. Along with that comes a technology piece where teachers can record student performance and print out progress monitoring reports on a regular basis. So it's a lot of assessment. We also created the Florida Center for Reading Research, which is now a national laboratory for reading research in the state of Florida, which provides a lot of context for if students are struggling on this particular reading skill, here are some strategies to remediate that. So there are several different things that the state's done for K-2 in order to improve information as well as instruction.
There's a lot of sentiment out there that retention is cruel, and what we want you to understand is that not retaining some of these students is what's really, truly cruel. Sending a kid into middle school incapable of doing middle school work is not going to work out well for anyone, and we can do better than that.
Okay. Sir, your
Hi,
name?
Jameson Taylor. I'm with the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, and I want to thank you both for the great work that you've been doing. When I look at Florida, I kind of marvel at the perfect situation, and I know it wasn't perfect, and it was a lot of hard work, but the situation that you have where you're able to get through a package of reforms. By comparison, if I look at Mississippi last session, we tried to get through school choice reforms, and that didn't go. We tried to get through A through F grading with a change in the labels, but also a change in the actual formula used to arrive at the labels. At the end of the day, what we got was just a change in the labels. How important are the different reforms that you've been talking about? For instance, when you passed A through F grading, what else did you change at that same time, that same year? It's my understanding that y'all passed that along with the third grade reading and along with, no, so that's not the case. So what passed first, and kind of what can you look at as the catalyst? And then for legislators here, if there's kind of one thing that, you know, if you're not in a situation where you can pass all of that all at the same time, what one thing do you think that folks should concentrate on?
Most of the things we're showing you happened in 1999. The literacy piece came later, school grading, the school choice programs. But I mean, there's no, I think the key, I often get this question from lawmakers, you know, there are a slight variation, right? They'll say, well, which one did it? And we'll do that one, right? And the truth is we don't know, because it's a really messy situation where there are multiple policy reforms going on at the same time and other things happening. And so my reaction is, look, ask for what you want, fight as hard as you can for it, and get as much as you can as soon as you can get it. Because the honest to God truth is we don't know, right? If you do half of this, we don't know what happens. If you do half of it, we'll find out, you know, in a few states. But you know, be bold and put it out there what you want to do, and do more than this, in fact. But get as much as you can, as fast as you can.
And specifically in 1999, it was school grades, it was opportunity scholarships, which is if a school earned an F 2 out of 4 years, they had the opportunity to attend another higher performing public school or private school. School recognition funding, or the $100 incentive per student, as Dr. Leonard said, reading came like 3 or 4 years later. It didn't happen all at the same time. And Jameson, you have enough Mississippi folks here. Y'all are gonna pass a lot of stuff this year.
I'm Joe McTighe from CAPE, which is Council for American Private Education. I have a specific variation of that question. I think, like a lot of people, I was struck yesterday by the contrast between John Podesta, who dismissed vouchers as a distraction, and Condi Rice and Joel Klein, who said it would be their first tool for school reform. You had a whole menu of interventions, one of which was school choice. Do you have either anecdotal evidence or hard data that suggests school choice is a distraction or an essential component of
Matter of
reform?
fact, I do. So, usually when we talk about school choice, this is what the conversation looks like, right? You know, that big one there could be school vouchers, and one of those with a site, maybe is cyber schools now, and it's like, eek, this is going to destroy public education, oh my God, right? Well, let me just real quickly, to address directly your point, let's talk about the McKay Scholarship Program. It's the first of its kind. It's the biggest school voucher program in the country. It is only for children with disabilities. And basically the way it works is, you know, a student can basically apply to the state of Florida and say, you know what, I'm not happy with the level of education my child with a disability is getting in their public school. I would like a McKay scholarship to go to a private or public school of my choice, okay? Now, a couple years ago, this is what the distribution looked like, right? Oh my goodness, 5% of the disabled children in Florida rushed out to the private schools and thus crushing the public schools, right? No. If you go and look at the NAEP scores, okay, these are the combined NAEP scores for only children with disabilities, you know, across the country. What you find is that Florida's has the highest gains for children with disabilities in the country. Now, this is not exclusively because of the McKay program, right? There's all these other reforms happening at the same time, okay? But the fact of the matter is that every child with a disability in Florida has the ability, if they need it, right? Now, 5% of them have actually directly accessed the program by doing a transfer, right? But 100% of these students have the ability to transfer if they feel like they need it, and that is empowering in a very real sense. I think we throw around the word empowerment a long time, kind of in a sort of meaningless way, right? Having the option to leave if you need to actually makes it less likely that you're going to need to do so. We see remarkable academic improvement among some of the very most disadvantaged students in the entire public school system. These are public school gains, okay? These are the students, quote, left behind in the damaged public schools. They're making remarkable academic progress, okay? And I believe, in part, because of the fact that they have the ability to opt out, okay? So there's that evidence, and there's some more evidence I could show you, Joe, but yeah, from Florida specifically, there are other choice programs as well. But yes, I think that this is a key component to what happened in Florida, is by expanding parental options, right? You give people the option to not only to opt out of a bad situation, but also to match the individual needs of their child with a school that happens to meet them, right? Whether that's a charter school, through a digital, you know, or private school or whatever. Okay, so Florida's done more in private school choice than any other state. There's zero evidence to suggest that it has in any way damaged the public school system at all.
And in fact, the Opportunity Scholarship Program said that if a school earns an F2 out of any rolling 4-year period, that students have the ability to transfer to another higher performing public school or to go to a private school. And what we found is it was struck down by a constitutional amendment in 2006, and we did comparison analysis. We had some guys from Harvard and some guys from the Manhattan Institute look at what the impact of competition and choice has on student performance. When the Opportunity Scholarship Program was struck down, 753 out of 2.7 million Florida school children were using an Opportunity Scholarship. What the researchers did is they looked at schools that earned a D school letter grade and split them in half, looked at the ones that had an F in their previous history and ones that did not have an F in their previous school history. Those that had an F in their previous school history had a threat of students leaving that school, thereby taking the funding associated with those students and going somewhere else. The schools with an F in their school history, the D schools that had an F in their school history, had a much higher increase in the developmental scale score of students that were at that D school than the schools that did not have an F in their school history. And it was a 9 or a 10-point difference. When that Opportunity Scholarship was taken out, they did the same comparative analysis and found absolutely no difference in those students' scores. So the whole premise is, even though there's choice, not that many people are taking advantage of it, but it's doing more to help improve the schools in which the students stay, as well as providing choice for parents to believe that they have a better option for their student. And so far and away, we can provide research study after research study with Florida data that demonstrates that choice does make a difference in student performance, and not just for the students who opt for the choice, but also for everybody else that sticks around in those public schools.
Excellent Question?
Thank you. Yes, Ed Emery from Missouri. How much of the changes that you've shown us were statutory, and how much of them were administrative rules? Or if they were all statutory, or most of them, you know, how big was how many pages did you add to the Florida statutes in order to accomplish it?
Well, that's a brilliant question. We actually, in Florida, did a entire school code rewrite. So as we were implementing these new reforms, they put together a task force that was the K-20th Governance Task Force, because during that same time, Florida switched from an elected Commissioner of Education to an appointed Commissioner of Education, restructured the State Board of Education, and there were so many changes happening at that time that they set forth a task force to rewrite the school code. I had the privilege of being on that task force. It's the most exciting thing I've done.
Okay.
We did completely rewrite the statutes, and it gave us a great opportunity to look at things that were now obsolete, things that needed to be sunset, things that were put in there in 1972, where it's like, hey, that might predate some of us. We probably ought to take that stuff out. No one's doing it anymore, and really implement some of these things. The A+ plan that we passed in '99 was, a decent packet of single-page, double-spaced legislation, but it did give us an opportunity to really revisit it. And I was being sarcastic that it was one of the most fun things that I've done. It really was, and I would encourage states to really think critically, because we even heard this morning is we can't stop doing anything in education. I think we really need to revisit some of the things that we are doing, and does it make sense that we're still doing it, and putting together a task force to rewrite your school code. It's a good way to do that. A lot of it is statutory.
So the question was, is it virtually all statutory?
Sorry. Most of it's statutory, but a lot of the statute grant rulemaking authority. The school grading legislation 1008.25 in Florida statute is maybe this long. It grants rulemaking authority to the State Board of Education, so 6A 1.00981 is maybe this long, and really defines out some more of the business rules. And then, of course, there's department policy that lays on top of that for the technical implementation of it. But statutory doesn't need to be substantial as long as you have a good working relationship with your department.
Thank you. And it looks like we are now out of time. Could you please join me in thanking the experts?